Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Adam Balderstone for another episode of Bedrock and Balderstone to talk about I, Claudius, Episode 5, Some Justice. This one is set in roughly 20 AD or so, and the basic story is pretty simple. Germanicus, Claudius's brother, dies while he's in command of legions in Syria, and his wife, Agrippina, leads a prosecution against the people that she believes were conspiring to kill him. So Piso and his wife, Plancina, who may or may not have been directed by Livia and or Tiberius. And so there's a whole trial. We also get to see sort of the burgeoning power of Sejanus here, and we're introduced to Caligula as a small child. And I think there are maybe a few other key plot details that emerge over the course of the episode. But basically this episode is about the trial around Germanicus's death and the eventual suicide, or not so suicide, of Piso. But before we get into the episode, last episode we had talked about the death of Augustus, and me and Adam had different recollections of the event, so we promised to watch it again and sort of relitigate, what exactly happened. And that question was, did Livia steal Augustus's tears? And so we just both rewatched it, and I'll put it to you first. What was your take seeing it for another time?
Yeah, I think I have to lean a little closer to your interpretation, because I'm going to put it down to having previously watched this on old-fashioned cathode ray televisions and it not being as clear. But she is crying before the tears are there before she puts her fingers to her eye, and you can put that down to staging, blame it, go, oh well, she's just, that's just because they needed the tears there, blah blah blah. But no, she is physically crying. Her face is contorted. She is literally crying before she puts her fingers to her eyes. So I was being a little bit too harsh on her and accusing her of using. See, part of what got me on that thought too, another thing, is that there is earlier in the episode the comment about how easily he cries, and so that kind of got me on that thought too. But no, she definitely was crying beforehand.
Though I agree with you, but at the same time, I did feel more ambiguous about the scene watching it again than I felt the first time. Because when I first saw it, I always assumed that she was just closing his eyes because he had died, but she does touch her own tears with her hand after she touches his eyes, and there is a considerably higher volume of tears after that. So I don't know if it's meant to be an ambiguous thing, and maybe because of the old TVs and the staging, they needed to have the tears there. But like you say, she is in the act. She's clearly crying. Like, she's clearly got grief on her face.
Yeah.
But maybe it's also a gesture that's significant. Like, she's, sort of mingling their tears together. I don't know. But it left. I was sort of a little bit less certain about my stance after seeing it again.
And I'll say I've got another revision of things I've argued earlier as the show's gone on, which is I've argued, that her key motivation is just to get her son to be emperor. But it's in this last speech. I've said that, but I'm saying, but I'm revising that because, the little speech she kind of gives as Augustus is dying there. It's clear that, a lot of it it's not just about getting Tiberius on the throne. That's part of it, but there's an element of revenge for the civil war. Yes. It's like, it's not just about getting Tiberius there. It's about destroying everyone, basically destroying Augustus's legacy at the same time. It's like, which plays into the fact she doesn't really seem to like Tiberius very much. He's a disappointing son, but he's the agent of her revenge, and she's going to use him anyway.
Well, and the other detail that's kind of important is all the people that she eliminates are folks that you could say have Republican sympathies. and the
True.
people that she puts into power are people who clearly are fine with the imperial line of succession. So even Augustus, like Augustus himself says to Claudius in that episode, I'm a Republican too. And we both know he's not really a Republican.
Yeah,
and a Republican in the
likes to
Roman
think
sense,
he
not
is.
the modern American sense. But he's not really a Republican, but he has this feeling in his heart that, at least in the, I'm not saying historically that Augustus did, but in the show, there's this sense that he kind of yearns for maybe a return to what Rome was. And Livia clearly doesn't, because I feel like she's always the one making the case, even if it's in her own self-interest and in Tiberius's interest, about the civil wars and things like that, that, and she just doesn't seem to have the trust in the Roman people that a lot of the other folks in the show might have.
Yeah, well, honestly, it's and having things go back to the Republic too would also, if her goal is partly to destroy Augustus's legacy to an extent, as far as what he really wants. I mean, she wants him to look good. She wants to make him a god, all of that, but to destroy as well. It's like, the ultimate thing you could, Augustus could have done to cement his legacy would be to have brought the Republic back. He would have been the new Cincinnatus. He was the guy that had all the power. He ruled the world, but he gave it away and went back to his farm and restored the Republic. But from a Roman idealistic sense, that would have been the best play he ever could have done. So she wouldn't want that.
Well, no, and I mean, obviously, we're getting to a much bigger topic here, but
we are. I'm sorry,
but no, it's fine. It's fine.
The weeds here,
and the feasibility too is the other question there.
Well, exactly.
Which is one of the things that kind of makes me sympathetic to Livia. Like, as terrible as a evil person as she is, I feel like she sometimes has a better handle on things in terms of what's actually feasible than some of the other people.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, she's very intelligent in what she does a lot of times. I mean, you have to admire Livia, even as you despise her. It's like I felt like, we haven't got into the episode we just watched, but she is very, very, very smart in this particular episode.
Well, and that's another thing that's, I think, an important part of the character in the show is that, because she's a woman, she's not going to have access to the direct power that Augustus and Tiberius and all these people should have. But maybe a part of what's going on here is that she knows that she has the ability to there might a lot of her resentment as a character might be coming out of the fact that she has to govern through all of these people when in her mind maybe Rome would be better off if just she was the one directly controlling things.
Definitely. So, there's no question about that.
But yeah, so in this episode, again, like I said, it's about the trial surrounding the death of Germanicus. A lot of interesting stuff goes on here. We get a lot of, and this is kind of really ushering in like a new phase of the show. Like this is the phase where characters like Sejanus and Caligula become important, and it's and we're starting to see the shade of Tiberius's reign. And then he's sort of this, I don't know, he's kind of like he's sort of like the middle point between Augustus and Caligula. He's not as bad as Caligula becomes, but he's definitely not as good as Augustus, and he's not, and as we learn, he's not well loved.
Yeah.
So, but how'd you feel about the episode?
I thought this was a great episode. I mean, I really like the touch of. It's a clever move the way it kind of makes the time jump where we go ahead to Germanicus already being dead at the start of the episode, because it almost feels like that's going to be the next beat is going to be what happens with Germanicus, but it's already over at the time, which is clever because it keeps things unpredictable and
it clouds the details, which is very important.
Yes. Yeah, that's another good point. But I also really like the fact that this episode is mainly seen through the eyes of Piso and Plancina. They are the main characters. Two characters we've never heard of, never seen before, but we've got this episode, which is pretty much their story. and the characters we have been following are somewhat. I mean, we do see Claudius and the others all kind of conspiring to bring about this trial, but that's almost like the B story in this
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah, no, we definitely get a lot of Piso and Plancina, and I don't know, I do find them interesting characters. Plancina is obviously, I mean, she's obviously looking out for Plancina by the end of the episode, and Piso is sort of like Plancina seems to understand what's going on, and Piso seems to not quite grasp the severity of their situation, and he keeps making these blunders that do not endear him any further to Tiberius. And Tiberius has every reason to want to protect Piso, largely, out of self-preservation. But as we learn in later episodes, he does bear a personal grudge over what happens here. So I think there is also resentment that, he doesn't like what he's forced to do. But Piso does this thing where, he has letters written directly to him from Tiberius that have the imperial seal, and he presents them in the Roman Senate. And when he's asked, well, if why we should, why can't we open them if they're evidence? And he says they're not evidence, they're just here amid my letters. He's trying to be smooth, and it's just not. He is not. He kind of comes off as sort of a, I don't know. He seems like he was made governor of Syria, but he doesn't seem like his talents would meet the role. It seems like he's been elevated beyond maybe what his level of competence should have him placed as.
Yeah, and the thing with the letters, just to explain that, I mean, it's if I obviously they can't be open because of the emperor's order, but the emperor could allow them to be open, so it forces Tiberius to tell the whole Senate, no, you can't look at those, which makes him look so bad, and it's like Piso just he doesn't think about things like that at all, and it's he is bumbling, and I mean it's interesting how I feel about these characters, because it's like they are these people that went and did these terrible things. Right? But I kind of developed kind of a sympathy for Piso just because he is such a bumbling fool.
Yeah, no, you do, especially when it's clear that his wife is trying to save herself, and so in the end, spoilers, she talks him into to doing sort of a joint suicide, but when he hesitates, she pretends to kill herself and then stabs him. And so, there's like you do feel bad for the guy by the end of it. And a lot of what you feel bad about is that he just doesn't understand the truth of what's going on all around him. At every point, he just doesn't grasp, that he's making things worse by putting the letters out there, that Sejanus is putting the guards at his house, not really as protection so much as insurance, maybe. There's all that he just doesn't understand what all these maneuvers mean, it seems, and Plancina fully does.
And he has this one additional letter that he's kept hidden from Livia, which is incredibly incriminating, where Livia sent this direct letter. It doesn't have the imperial seal on it, and he, when he decides he's going to use it, he says his warning, well, I'm going to read this before the Senate, and tells him, it's like, man, do you think you're ever going to stand before the Senate alive after you've given that threat?
Yeah.
I mean, if you were going to do it, you needed to keep that letter a little closer to your chest. Once he'd announced that, he was dead. There was just one way or another.
And before I forget, I just want to mention one thing that struck me was the conversation between Tiberius and Piso. It reminded me so much of the conversation between Augustus and Agrippa. And Piso, even like the way he was talking, like he wasn't as, he's a pale imitation of Agrippa, but he reminded me a lot of Agrippa in some of his mannerisms and some of the ways that he was communicating with Tiberius. And I was wondering if that was intentional or not.
Wait, who was a pale imitation of Agrippa?
Piso reminded me of Agrippa. which I don't know why. Maybe because they were trying
Ah.
to sort of get into your head that Tiberius had a sense of loyalty or fondness towards Piso in some way. Um,
Okay. Okay.
but what was interesting to me in this episode too was the poisoner Martina. I think that was Miriam Margoyles who played her, wasn't it? Um,
I don't know who played her.
I'm, I feel like it was. I'm not 100% sure because she's very young, but uh, I'll try to look that up and confirm it by next episode. But she has a whole conversation with Livia because Livia ends up, at first we think Sejanus has gotten to her. Like the prosecution brings in Martina as a witness, and that's catastrophic for Tiberius and Piso because she can confirm everything. And Livia gets to her first and gives her shelter, and they have this great conversation where they're talking about poison and one poisoner to another, and all of the details of what happened emerge during this conversation. But it's all but you're almost more fascinated just by the conversation about the poisoning and Livia's command of the subject, which seems greater than this this Martina character. But we learned that Caligula was pulled into the conspiracy, and that that he was able to sneak into his father's chamber, and so a lot of the way that Germanicus was poisoned was she used belladonna, but she was also planting signs of witchcraft in order to get him to think that he was cursed, or just basically nudge him over the edge. Like, if he thinks he's going to die, it just makes it easier. And he had this, what was it? This jade, some kind of jade medallion, that he was latching onto to protect himself. And as long as he had that, it gave him a sense of hope. And I think Caligula was the one that she got to sneak into the chamber and steal it. And that was kind of what sealed his fate. And at the end of the episode, Caligula is the one who burns the letters. I think he burns the whole house down.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's the upshot of that conversation is, Martina reveals to Livia a lot about Caligula.
Yes.
And at that point, it seems basically Livia's like, oh, I can use this kid.
Yes.
It's like seems to be her take from that. And so, Martina goes out of the picture, and he becomes her agent of chaos, basically.
But what's interesting too is Livia has an odd reaction to him. She says he's not a, because when Martina gets him in on the conspiracy, she gets him in because he says that he's a god. And she says, well, a god should be able to play the death game. And that's how she, and Livia says he's not a god, he's a monster. Like, she recognizes just how beyond the pale Caligula is. And Antonia has a similar reaction, because earlier in the episode, Antonia finds him in bed naked with his sister. And she's about to lock him in a basement. And, Antonia is a very strict person. And so we know that she's going to punish him severely. And Claudius shields him and says, I'll take care of him. And Claudius tries to reason with him. And number one, Antonia is enormously frustrated with Claudius, and says he's a fool and that he should have died instead of Germanicus. But then when he actually tries to persuade Caligula about the just how wrong it is to do what he was doing, he's just totally unable to do so. He explains to him that it's wrong, and Caligula just keeps saying why to everything. And but what's interesting to me is I think this is where the seed of their relationship is planted, because their relationship becomes so important over the course of the period that covers Caligula's reign. And Caligula almost has this, like, there are moments, and again, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but there are moments later in the show where Caligula clearly, he's killing people left and right, and every time he's going to kill Claudius, he always hesitates for some reason. And I think that it's this subconscious affection that he has for Claudius that's sort of built around Claudius's guarding him against some of the punishments that he might receive, and moments like this. So yeah, but back to the trial. Ultimately, it ends with Piso having to commit suicide, but Plancina is the one who ultimately does the deed. And in
Plancina's defense, I have to say that her points about shielding the family's reputation and everything, I felt were very accurate
Yes.
Roman views. I mean, I felt like that was the, I mean, it was self-serving, obviously, but it was the proper Roman approach. Would be, we're going to shield the family. You fall on your sword. You're dead, but the family line lives on. Is the way to go.
She's not really painted in a villainous way here. I think this is out of desperation that she does these things. And on a normal day, she wouldn't have caused her husband harm. But I mean, she has very few options available to her by the end of the episode. And so, I mean, her basic options are commit suicide with the husband or save herself. And she finds a way to save herself, which is, I mean, you know, it's not the most romantic thing in the world, obviously. Piso is going to have a sense of betrayal, but it's probably how most people would behave in that situation if we honestly hold their feet to the fire.
Sure. And she recoils in horror after stabbing him too. You know, it's like it was a horrifying. I mean, you know, it's pretty harsh that she could even do it, but it you know, she did not have an easy time with that.
And I think also the other interesting aspect of this episode is watching Sejanus do his work. He you know, number one, when this stuff all starts and the crowd starts agitating and they're concerned that you know, that there might be, you know, some kind of revolution or rebellion, Sejanus is sort of the one who's mediating the discussion between Livia and Tiberius.
That's a great scene.
Yeah, and we see it just kind of, I mean, it's interesting to see sort of all the, you know, Sejanus is so calm. I think that's the connecting line between him and Picard that I was talking about before. Is just he's so calm in the face of all this stuff, and when in the hands of an evil character, that comes across as incredibly cold. And so here he's talking about how, you know, well, they have a pretty tale, but they don't have any evidence. And Livia shoots back with, well, you've buried more men with your pretty tales than anyone I know. And so there's this sparring going on between him and Livia that's quite interesting. And they're really so similar as characters. They're both rising above what they normally would be allowed to achieve by resorting to these clever, underhanded tactics.
I mean, they're sparring, but there's also this admiration between them in that scene, which is very interesting. And you know, and as the episode goes on too, we learn that, you know, when Martina disappears, our assumption is, oh, Sejanus found her. But it's like, no, Livia has got her own agents out there. She's playing her own whole separate game than either Tiberius or Sejanus.
And what's so cool about how they do it in the show is they never say all that stuff. You just see her with Livia and you immediately make all those connections in your own mind. You know, you can imagine all this stuff going on in the background that never even appears in the show, which again, the show is brilliant at. You imagine battles and cities and agents doing their dirty work in the streets, and you never see a sign of it at all. You just know it because you see two characters talking. And so I always find that fascinating. Another thing that happens in the Sejanus scene is there's this whole discussion, like Tiberius's whole thing is, why don't they like me? Which is really been his whole thing. You know, before it was, why doesn't Augustus like me? And now it's, why don't the people like me?
People like me.
And he's this grumpy sort of, he's just, I guess you would call him sort of like a low energy person. He doesn't have the enthusiasm necessary to charm people. Oh, go ahead.
I know, as Livia brings up, it's like, you know, well, you know, he says, well, I think they really hate you. And Livia's like, well, yes, but I don't care. You know, she just doesn't matter to her whether people like her, which gives her a power that Tiberius doesn't have, because it bothers him greatly.
And you can see it in his agitation, and also in that moment, you know, he says, "Has it ever occurred to you that the person they hate is you, not me?" And she says, "There's nothing in this world that occurs to me that is not that occurs to you that has not occurred to me first, and that is the affliction I live with." She just has always these great rebuttals against anything he can throw at her. And like anybody who's ever had a family member like that. It's just this, when you have somebody who's just a little bit smarter than you that you can never quite top. It's and Livia is, leaps and bounds smarter than Tiberius. So he's always sort of living in her shadow even when he's emperor. But yeah, so I think there's so many little details over the course of this episode that are enjoyable and add to the overall texture of the show. But yeah, I don't know. Was there anything else that was any other scenes or anything that you thought was worthy of comment?
Let's see. It's interesting how people's opinions of Claudius in this episode. I mean, basically within his own circle, he's become a very respected, well thought of person.
Yes.
which is very interesting. But of course, as we see his mother, though, she still just has contempt for him. So it's those. I thought that was an interesting discrepancy within this episode.
Well, and his circle is quite interesting because it's Herod, it's Castor, Tiberius' own son, who's leading the prosecution, which is another interesting aspect, and Agrippina. And so, I mean, you have it is and like you say, his demeanor when he's among them is quite different. I mean, he still is Claudius, he still stutters, but he's got a lot more confidence when he's around them, and they have a lot, and they clearly respect his opinion, so much so that he's the one who comes up with the idea of holding the trial in the Senate rather than in the courts. And that's a very important point in the episode. That's the thing that really prevents Tiberius from just shelving the whole thing behind the scenes. And so, and Herod even comments on that when he mentions it. He's clearly in admiration of Claudius's ability to think through these things.
And I mean, during the first scene with Agrippina and Claudius, when Claudius meets her, it's I mean, she just has a lot of affection for him. That really struck me. It's like, because I couldn't remember the relationship between these characters, but it's like, I knew Germanicus cared a lot about Claudius. It's like, oh, good, his wife has the same level of affection for Claudius. It was really nice to see. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just found that, it's just interesting, though, that his mother just can't let go.
His mother is a puzzle. She's she's the character that you desperately want to respect Claudius, and you just never quite get by the end you get a certain something, but it's not even there's a real backhanded thing she does even in her final moments that take it away. So it's frustrating, but it's also the thing that makes her character so strong and so just that makes her work as a character in the show. It's the reason why you respect her in a way. It's like the respect she withholds from Claudius sort of adds to your respect of her somehow in this weird way. I don't quite know how to explain it. I think because Claudius respects her, and he desperately wants he desperately wants her to hold him in high esteem, and you also know that you get the suspicion that like her by withholding that respect from him and almost being a little bit contemptuous of him at times, it's the thing that makes him strive and makes him become a better character. So it's very interesting to me. It's very interesting to me. Because I mean, if you just look at the characters who slip into evil, so many of them, it's because they're spoiled by their parents in this show. Do you know what I mean? There's like a real family theme in the show, and like, I mean, Caligula is the prime example of that. Like Agrippina is just, she's blind to all of his flaws, and she just, she spoils him, and you could make a very
so much.
Exactly. And you could make a strong argument that, I mean, again, I don't think historically, but in the context of the show, maybe he wouldn't have gone so far as he does if he had some stricter parenting.
I don't know. It's tough to say with Caligula in this show, because he's definitely, I mean, at this point, he's already attempted to poison his father. Well, poisoned his father and essentially tried to drive him mad. And I mean, it's like he's already so bad. It's like I don't know if he'd gotten the harsher punishment, for the rude things he did in this
Well,
episode.
I don't think you.
It would have
I don't think you could turn him into a Claudius. I'm just wondering if he could have been steered into being a Tiberius or a Sejanus rather than
than a Caligula.
Yeah, than a Caligula.
He is the example of his own name. I mean, you can't go with another example.
But yeah, no, there's definitely something evil in his heart from the outset.
Yeah.
But again, if you look at his character, his whole thing is by age 7 or however old he. I don't know. Was he like 11 at this point? He's young. He's quite young. He thinks he's a god already, and he's murdered his father. Those are two things that are, astounding for a child of that age to do and to think.
Yeah.
But the thinking you're a god thing, I feel like that's the kind of thing that can really get out of control or at least be exacerbated by the fact that his mom is not being strict enough with him, and that when and the mom establishes that Agrippina says Germanicus was very strict with him. So I wonder if by having Germanicus die at this point, it just allows Caligula to really blossom early into the villain that he. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Exactly. He. I mean, I don't know. He's definitely insane, but maybe his insanity could have been channeled in a slightly less horrible direction. But yeah, of course, as it is, he ends up at the end of the episode, he's kind of doing tasks for Livia, which is exactly the wrong direction you want to be channeling him in at this point.
Well, and later in the show, Claudius has a very frank conversation with him when Caligula fully believes he's a god, and Claudius is engaging him on those terms very wisely.
Yeah.
But he asks him, "Well, why did you kill your father?" And Caligula says, "Well, he stood in my way." Like he's so that answer is always kind of stuck in my head, and I just kind of always wonder, well, what would have happened if his father continued to stand in his way? What would the result have been? I don't think he would have ever been made into a Claudius type figure. I just wonder if maybe he wouldn't have become so deranged.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's also the you have to wonder what if he'd never been exposed to Martina too. I mean, because he already had the idea he was a god, but she's the one who put the whole death game thing in his head. It's like maybe he would have been a god of wine or something. Yeah. Who knows? But no, she put the death game in his head, and he stuck with that.
And again, I'm just thinking this in terms of the show, not in terms of the history. Like in terms of what the show would have us.
Believe. Definitely. I mean, I think it's just a general ground rule for this podcast. When we're talking about these characters, we're talking about the show, and it's getting into what historical accuracy is a deeper well than I think is worth at the moment.
Another thing I wanted to comment on, because I know I'll forget about it, but it's always it's my favorite part of the episode. I don't know why. I think I do know why, but the episode begins on a toilet, on a Roman style toilet, and I just find that a fascinating detail. Because number one, there's this whole thing of you never see characters go to the bathroom in TV. That's sort of it's the one thing that you generally don't see people do, unless there's some humor to be had. And granted, there is here, but I don't know. I like that they begin the episode with the title character when he's an emperor on the toilet. There's something very grounding about that. About sort of like even the emperor has to go to the bathroom, but also just the fact that those are details that you're always wondering about. And again, they don't give you a lot of explanation for the toilet, but it looks like a pretty accurate replication of a Roman style toilet to me from what I've seen. And so it's kind of a cool thing to feature in the show.
Yeah, and I mean it's an interesting scene on multiple levels too, because the reason he's up is because his stomach's upset because he ate too much late at night. Which anytime anyone's complaining about any kind of digestive disorder in the show, you're instantly now like, ooh.
Well, and that's actually important because he mentions mushrooms. He says mushrooms,
Yeah.
And again, I'm going to spoil the end of the show. He's poisoned by a mushroom by his wife at the end of the whole series. And so it's a pretty important plot detail that they're foreshadowing. But yeah, no, but I like how it feels to me like what they're doing with a lot of these scenes with him, where we see him as emperor, and he's kind of just mentioning names and people. Like he'll mention little details about the palace. I think that they're paving the way for that in your mind, so that by the time you get there, you are able to draw the connecting points. Like you already know that he's afraid of being poisoned, for example, and so I think that's important by the time we get to that stage of the show. But yeah, it's an interesting scene, and also it ends with him falling asleep on the toilet and burning I forget what he was reading, but he's burning he might even be reading some of the letters that had to do with the trial, I would imagine. And he ends up burning them just like Caligula had done one scene before. So it's kind of a cool way to end the episode. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, am I leaving out any other characters or details that we need to discuss here?
I think we've pretty much covered it at this point. I mean, this was just this was just I mean, all the episodes have been good, but I think that this was just a particularly good one. I mean, and it's it just in picking things up. And once again, I talked last episode about the wanting things to work out even though you know they won't. It's like there's just moments in this episode where you think, it's possible to think, it's like if it just went a little bit differently, they would have succeeded in exposing Tiberius. It's like just so close, so close. But I know it's not going to work out. The show's not going to have changed. History's not going to have changed. But it just has moments where it pulls me in.
No, yeah, no, I'm in the same place with you on that one. So I guess the only other thing is, it's interesting that we have Caligula introduced. I mean, he's a kid at this point. Whoever they got to play him is super creepy, by the way. That
he does a great job.
I think by the next episode he's an adult. I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure we see him as a young man the next time we see him. But I really do like the way that they lay the groundwork for his character and for his and I also agree with you that the time elapse I thought was really nice at the start of the episode, because I felt like I remember, and they do show you glimpses of the things. Like there's a flashback of Germanicus seeing his name slowly lose a letter every day, and things like that. So they give you some of the visuals, but the end result is whenever I think back to the show, I feel like I saw that as part of the show. So it just kind of works, and it gets the plot to where it needs to be.
This show never wastes any time. It never goes, okay, well, the next point is plot D, but we've got to wade through B and C to get to D. It'll just always jump to D. And it's fine with you catching up.
Yeah, because when you think about it, as interesting as it is, I think an episode about Germanicus being poisoned and killed would have been a place-setting episode. It would have been it would have been the thing that I hate on TV now, which is I know I have to get through this episode to get to the good episode next week, which I can't stand. And with Claudius, I never feel like I'm having that. I feel like all of it is good. There's I don't think there's an episode I dislike in the show. Maybe as we work our way through here, I'll be reminded of one that I'm not so happy with, but I feel like all the episodes are good quality episodes. It's like going to a restaurant and getting a good meal every night, trying something different on the menu. I think what is the next episode? Anyways, it's
I had the title.
It's Queen of Heaven. Oh, that's
yes.
That's an interesting one. So we get Queen of Heaven next. And we'll be back I guess on Sunday to discuss it. That's probably our next episode. And tomorrow we're gonna do Deadly Breaking Sword is our next movie for Wuxia Weekend. And I also have a Wuxia Workshop podcast for Brave Archer 2 that we put up. So we have a lot going on in the podcast channel. And as always, definitely feel free to send us questions or thoughts, and we can address them on the podcast. I'm always happy to hear from people. And yeah, so we'll be back on in the coming days. And until then, we will talk to you later.